Sie wissen, es gibt die historisch-kritische Bibellektüre. Was halten Sie denn davon?
As I said earlier, the majority of Christian believers do take it literally, and I know theologians don't, and I've said that before. As for theologians, how do they decide which bits to take literally and which bits not to take literally? They cherry pick. They say, oh, I like that verse, okay, that verse we'll have that one. No, we won't have that one, I don't like that one, we'll have that one. How do you decide which bits to take? And how does your poor congregation know which bits to decide? Do you wait for the priest to stand up in the pulpit and say, well, you can ignore verse 32 and 33 because we've decided they're not true anymore, but verse 34 is pretty good. The majority of people, as I say, the majority of Christians do believe that Jesus turned water into wine, do believe that Jesus arose from the dead. There may be sophisticated theologians who don't. I would like to ask them, how do you decide? The answer is usually that they actually don't really believe it at all.
Also Sie meinen, dass die überhaupt nicht in die Bibel glauben?
I'm saying that they cherry pick which bits to call metaphorical and which bits to take literally. And how is their wretched congregation supposed to know?
Gut, aber dann müsste man sagen, das ist eine Kritik an die Theologen. Also die schaffen es offenbar nicht, das zu kommunizieren. Ich würde das in Zweifel ziehen, dass die meisten Leute, wie Sie sagen, die Bibel wörtlich nehmen. Selbst wenn das stimmt, ich meine, die sie nicht wörtlich nehmen, die haben offenbar gelernt, dass man biblische Texte historisch einordnen muss, dass man sie in aller Regel, würde ich eben sagen, nicht wörtlich, sondern metaphorisch versteht. Sie sagen jetzt, ja, wo wissen wir welche Stellen? Wir können es ja, warum kann man es nicht generell mal versuchen, dieses Buch als ein metaphorisches Buch? Zum Beispiel, wie gehen wir mit griechischen Mythen um? Die nehmen wir ja auch nicht wörtlich und trotzdem lesen wir aus der Geschichte von Ödipus oder von Prometheus oder wie sie alle heißen, wir lesen da gewisse metaphorische Dinge raus, die wir sagen, die haben doch heute noch eine Bedeutung, aber nicht eine wörtliche Bedeutung. Warum kann man das mit der Bibel nicht auch so machen?
That would be fine, and if only people did that. But
aber das machen die doch.
Well, you quoted even in Switzerland, you said that only 60% of people...
aber das ist nicht die Mehrheit. Yeah. Sie sagen immer die meisten.
In America, it's... No, I mean, it is true that you can cherry pick your Christians. You can find Christians who actually don't believe a word of it, but think, oh, it's rather a pretty myth. There are other Christians who take it very, very literally indeed. My book, The Greatest Show on Earth, takes off from the point that there are at least 40% of the American people who not only take it literally, but think the world is less than 10,000 years old. I mean, that's a very serious delusion, and it's 40% of the American people. Now, I'm actually not that interested in theologians who say, oh, we only believe that symbolically. I'm not interested in that. I accept that there's a certain beauty in the Greek myths, and that's fine, and nobody takes them literally. One can do the same thing of the Christian myths. It is actually quite surprising how many Christians, even those who call themselves serious theologians, who believe, say, in the virgin birth. Just absolutely no historical verification whatever, but they do take it seriously. The majority of theologians believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Quite a few of them believe even other miracles like turning water into wine. But even if they don't, I don't really care if they choose to cherry pick this verse or that verse. The majority of their congregation are not told, are not clearly guided as to which bits are metaphorical and which bits are not. Even the bits that are metaphorical, they're not really very good metaphors, are they? I mean, for example, the truly hideous story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac and just stopping at the last minute. Now, for the great majority of history, people have believed that, and many people still do believe it as fact. I bet that 40% of the American people believe it, for example, no question. The sophisticated theologians say, oh, it's an allegory, it's a parable, it's a metaphor. It was teaching the Jews that they should stop sacrificing humans and sacrifice sheep instead. It's pretty unpleasant sacrificing sheep, actually, but anyway, setting that on one side. If you want to tell people to stop sacrificing humans and sacrifice sheep instead, why not just tell them? Why dress it up in this truly hideous story of child abuse by Abraham against his son Isaac? What is the point of a myth like that?
Naja, Sie wissen ja vielleicht nicht, wie Leute funktioniert haben zu dieser Zeit. Also vielleicht hat man da wirklich, ich fantasiere jetzt etwas, vielleicht hat man da wirklich mit Mythen, war das die Art, wie man gewisse Dinge den Leuten gesagt hat. Das könnte doch sein. Also ich meine, wir gehen natürlich auch immer von unserer heutigen Zeit aus und sagen, ja damals, wie konnte man? Ist wahrscheinlich bei vielen Dingen so, dass man sie, eben darum sage ich ja, dass man sie eben auch im Entstehungskontext lesen muss. Aber gut, lassen wir...
Let me just answer that.
Okay.
And that's true, and the same is true of Greek myths, the same is true of the myths of the Vikings, the Norsemen. These are all to be taken as myths and studied as a part of anthropology, as a part of racial psychology or something of that sort. But to an enormous number of people, the Bible or the Quran is treated as sacred text. And priests and theologians really ought to come right out and say, this is not fact. This, at best it's allegory, at best it's no better than the Greek myths and the Norse myths. Read them all together, study them all together as myths. But that's not what they do. They give the impression to innocent people who don't know better, they give the impression that there is something special about this book, the Bible, or in the case of the Muslim world, this book, the Quran. You cannot pretend that it's just like the Greek myths. They are treated as special. The Gideon Bible is in every hotel room. Why aren't the Greek myths in every hotel room? There really is a difference in people's minds, and that includes the minds of so-called sophisticated theologians.
Es gibt ja auch viele Leute, die sagen, und das hören Sie auch ständig, wenn man keine Religion hat, wenn man alles naturalistisch, mechanistisch versteht, der Mensch als ein Bioautomat, als ein zufällig kosmologisch unbedeutendes Randphänomen in einem sinnleeren Universum, dann gibt es keinen metaphysischen, keinen vorgegebenen Sinn. Und jeder muss sich eben seinen Lebenssinn selber finden. Ist das vielleicht eine Überforderung für gewisse Menschen?
Well, if you mean that too much for certain people, that's a sort of patronizing view of certain people. I think that it would be very wrong to use a word like just or only a naturalistic view. A naturalistic view is wonderful. A naturalistic view is poetic. We are enormously privileged to have come into existence in this universe with brains capable of understanding it, capable too of doing poetry, of doing philosophy, of doing mathematics, of doing great literature. We must not demean it by suggesting that the only alternative to a sort of dry, dull, automaton view is religion. Religion absolutely isn't. You can be a poetic scientist, you can be an inspired scientist, you can be a musical scientist, you can be a loving scientist. You do not have to have religion. Religion is ancient superstition which doesn't help. It should be studied as ancient superstition and not treated as seriously or as respectfully as it now is. But as I've said already, this is all relevant to my previous book and not this book.
Sie haben ja bei dieser atheistischen Buskampagne damals auch mitgemacht. Man hat es im Einspieler ganz kurz gesehen. Da war ja das Motto, es gibt wahrscheinlich keinen Gott, also hör auf, dir Sorgen zu machen und genieße das Leben. Ich habe mich dann gefragt, ist es nicht geradezu zynisch, wenn man gewissen Menschen sagt, genieße das Leben? Ich stelle mir jetzt vor, ein 30-jähriger Mann, der gerade die Diagnose Hirntumor bekommen hat, oder eine Mutter, der gerade das Kind gestorben ist. Also, ist das nicht schwierig, dann einfach so als Lebensmotto zu sagen, genieß dein Leben?
Yes, I wasn't responsible for the slogan. I was part of the committee.
Mitgemacht.
Yes. Of course you can produce sob stories about people dying of cancer, and of course it doesn't help people like that. When you're trying to make a slogan for a bus, you've got to make it brief. That the meaning of that slogan, as I understand it from the people who devised it, was not just enjoy your life, but live life to the full. take life fully. Don't obsess about the afterlife, because there isn't going to be any afterlife. Concentrate on this life and make the best of it as you can. If you're dying of cancer, then make the best of that if you can, and that's very difficult. Of course it is. But religion isn't going to help you. Let's live our lives properly and fully and with open eyes, and courageously open eyes. Once again, I repeat, this is nothing to do with The Greatest Show on Earth. You're interviewing me about my previous book, which was published 4 years ago.
Aber ich denke, Sie sind ja vor allen Dingen auch berühmt geworden als dieser ganz scharfe Religionskritiker, was Sie jetzt hier ja auch zeigen. Und da wollte ich halt einfach mal gewisse Dinge noch nachfragen.
Okay, let's talk about the God Delusion and forget about The Greatest Show on Earth.
Nein, das
They're
haben wir
both
nicht
published
vergessen.
in German and I'm entirely happy.
Genau, also die deutsche Version ist gerade rausgekommen. Das haben wahrscheinlich noch viele Leute noch gar nicht gelesen. Was auch im Gotteswahn besprochen wird, die Frage, wie man denn eigentlich Ethik begründet ohne Religion. Viele Leute sagen, ja, ohne Religion kann man kein guter Mensch sein. Das ist natürlich Quatsch. Trotzdem glaube ich, es ist gar nicht einfach, Moral und Ethik zu begründen, wenn man sie nicht in etwas Absolutem festmachen kann. Also was legitimiert dann die Begründung?
I think it's an astonishing suggestion that you can get morals from religion. If you think about where your morals come from, if you're religious, do your morals come from the Bible? Do your morals include stoning people to death for adultery, stoning people to death for breaking the Sabbath? Do your morals include killing children who are cheeky to their parents? Do your morals include sacrificing people? The Bible and the Quran would be appalling sources of morality. Now, it is true, as I said before about cherry picking, that as you look through the Bible, you can find verses that accord with our modern moral sense. You can find verses that are in favor of slavery, and you can find verses that are against slavery. So you can pick the ones that are against slavery and reject the ones that are in favor of slavery. You can even find verses that say nice things about women, although it's quite hard to do. You can find a much larger number of verses in both the Bible and the Quran which give women a very hard time. So if you're prepared to go through the Bible and pick the verses you like, then you can find an adequate moral scheme. But how do you pick those verses? On non-biblical grounds. You pick those verses on grounds of a modern ethic, which we all share, whether we're religious or not, which has developed gradually over centuries and over decades, so that nowadays we don't accept slavery. Nowadays we respect women. Switzerland gave the vote to women, I think, as late as the 1970s, which is an utter disgrace. But that too has been a shifting moral zeitgeist, which has been happening irrespective of religion. By the way, Britain only gave the vote to women in the 1920s, which is pretty bad too. So we do not, as a matter of fact, get our morals, get our ethics from the Bible. We get it from somewhere else, and I agree with you, it's quite difficult to decide where we get it from, but wherever it is, it certainly isn't the Bible. Now, there's another way in which you might develop your morals from religion, which would be the carrot and stick, the threat of hell and the hope of heaven. I've even met people who say, if I wasn't religious, I would go out and kill my neighbor. Why shouldn't I do that? If I have no absolute morality, why shouldn't I do that? What an appalling reason to be moral. To be frightened of the great spy camera in the sky that's taking photographs of everything that you do. I and other atheists like me are no less moral, possibly no more moral, than anybody else. And if we're moral not because we're frightened of going to hell or because we hope to go to heaven, but because we have some better reason to be moral. I agree with you, it's difficult to find where that better reason comes from, but wherever it is, it most certainly is not the Bible. Wherever it is, it's something that we all share and which changes from decade to decade. As I said, votes for women is something that arose in the 20th century, and bizarrely, not before that, except in New Zealand, I think. Slavery was once accepted as totally normal, with biblical sanction, by the way. Slavery was abolished with some religious help and some non-religious help as well. We've shifted our moral zeitgeist. It moves with the times. We move with the times. And we don't get it from religion. Wherever we get it from, it's not religion.
Die Frage ist,